In this video, we shall talk about the sedimentary cycle. Under sedimentary cycle, we have taken up one of the example as the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is a major constituent of biological membrane, nucleic acid and cellular energy transfer system. Before studying about the phosphorus cycle, as we discussed in carbon cycle, we need to know the source, where it is found. The source of this phosphorus cycle is none other than or nothing but the rocks. But this phosphorus is present in the form of phosphate in the living organisms. That is, we are telling the phosphorus is the major constituent of biological membrane. That means when we take an living cell or when we take about an cell or in the human body, we can find the phosphate in different regions, such as the biological membrane, that is nothing but the biomembrane or the plasma membrane. In plasma membrane, we also find phosphate. We call it as phospholipid bilayer. Even in the plasma membrane, we can find the phosphate element, and we can also find the phosphate in nucleic acids, where that is in DNA and RNA. That is a major component, that is a phosphate is a major component which is very essential and present in the DNA as well as in the RNA. And cellular energy transfer system, that means nothing but the phosphate is also present in ATP, ADP, NADP, like this. That means adenosine triphosphate, adenosine diphosphate. We are repeating everywhere, that is phosphate, phosphate. That means the phosphate is present in the organism body in a different region, and it is one of the essential component. We can consider it as an essential component. Many animals need phosphorus to make shell, that is in molluscans. All the shell organism requires the phosphate to construct or to make the formation of cells and bones and also the teeth. Even we can find the phosphorus or phosphate in the teeth and the bones of the organisms. The natural reservoir or the natural source of the phosphorus is nothing but rock, which contains in the form of phosphate. Due to weathering of rocks, due to various environmental factors, the weathering of rocks, that is the breakdown of rocks to form the soil, due to weathering of rock, all this phosphate which is contains in the form of phosphate will be the reservoir of the phosphorus. Next, that is dissolved phosphate in the soil solution are absorbed by the roots of plants. Where the soil got the phosphorus, that is by the weathering of rocks. The rocks were the major source of phosphorus. They were containing the phosphorus when the weathering of rock took place. That is, the breakdown of rocks took place for the formation of soil, and that soil solutions are absorbed by the roots of plants. Those soil particles were having the phosphorus, and that was absorbed by the roots of the plants. And the herbivores and other animals get phosphate from the plants. These plants are eaten by the herbivores as the nutrition or the food, and through the food the herbivores and many other primary consumers which are depending on the plants are getting phosphate from the plants. And next, the waste products like dead organisms, undergoes the decomposition of phosphatizing bacteria and releases phosphorus. One is soil is obtaining phosphorus from the rocks, and from the soil it is transferred to plants, from plants to herbivores. Now the decomposers, that is the saprophytes, are obtaining phosphate from the dead organisms by the process of decomposition. That means the organisms or the animals which died, which had taken phosphate through its food, will die, and that will be decomposed by the bacteria and fungi and many other decomposers, and those decomposers are obtaining phosphorus or phosphate through the decomposition process. Major amount of phosphate will be washed off in running rainy water into smaller sediment and deeper sediment of sea. Smaller sediments, that is nothing but it might be ponds or lakes. Deeper sediments, that dissolved phosphate may flow through rainy water to the seas and oceans. The phosphate again enters, as soon as it enters the aquatic medium or the aquatic ecosystem, the phosphate again enters into the atmosphere through the marine fishes and birds. When the phosphate has entered the sea, the fishes will intake that, and that fishes are eaten by many of the aquatic birds, and the phosphate is transferred to the bird. But it is not sufficient enough to make good for the loss. Hence, phosphate cycle is called an imperfect cycle because utilization is less, wastage is more. But in carbon cycle, we call it as a perfect cycle or the complete cycle. Why? Because utilization was more, but the wastage is less. But here in phosphorus cycle, the utilization is less and the wastage is more. And here is a simplified model of phosphorus cycling in a terrestrial ecosystem. That is, the producers are obtaining phosphorus. That means producers are nothing but the autotrophs are obtaining phosphorus from the soil, and that phosphorus is transferred to the consumers through food. That is, these consumers are depending on the producers, and the consumers will transfer the phosphorus to the next detritus. That means after the death of these consumers, or through their fecal matter or through their waste, it leads to detritus. That is the organic substance, partially decomposed organic substance, that is detritus, and that detritus undergoes a decomposition, and after the decomposition the phosphorus is again released into the soil, and also from the soil, the phosphorus may go through running rainy water, and also again from the soil it might again uptake, or again it might be reabsorbed by the producers. How the phosphorus entered into the soil? By the process of rock minerals, that is nothing but by the weathering of rocks. We studied in the previous slide step by step. Here we are graphically representing the phosphorus cycle. Weathering of rock took place, and that phosphorus entered into the soil, and from the soil it was uptaken by producers, as well as from the soil the running water, that is the running rainy water, took off some amount of phosphorus. From the producers it was transformed to consumers, and that leads to detritus. Detritus also was consisting the phosphorus, and that was again decomposed, and again it was released back to the soil. This is how the cycle will be continuing, and that is why we are calling it as a cyclic process, that is the phosphorus cycle. Next, difference between carbon and phosphorus cycle. Some of the differences are listed here. We shall see one by one. Carbon cycle, the reservoir pool is atmosphere for the carbon cycle, but in the phosphorus cycle the reservoir pool is earth crust or the rocks. The second difference is it is a perfect cycle, but the phosphorus cycle is a imperfect cycle. Atmospheric input is more, but in phosphorus cycle the atmospheric input is very less. In carbon cycle, the exchange between organisms and environment is more, but in phosphorus cycle the exchange between the organisms and environment is negligible or very less. These are the very few differences between the phosphorus cycle and the carbon cycle. Ecosystem services. The product of ecosystem processes is named as ecosystem services. It is very beneficial, that is, ecosystem is very beneficial to the environment as well as for the humans or the mankind, and hence the products of ecosystem processes is named as the ecosystem services. Biodiversity should carry a price tag because healthy forest and many other ecosystems will provide following life supporting services. They are listed in the next slide, that is benefits of the ecosystem. The ecosystem provides following life supporting services. The first one is they purify air as well as the water. That means the ecosystem will purify the air. For example, when we have taken the forest as an ecosystem, these forests will purify the air, that is the polluted air or the carbon dioxide, maximum of the carbon dioxide is intaken or it is consumed by the trees and plants which are present in the forest, and by that way they also purify air, and also through water cycle they are cycling the water. They migrate droughts and floods. Where there is a huge dense forest, there will be a very good rainfall. When there is good rainfall, there will be no droughts. That is nothing but there will be no problems regarding the rainfall. And also they avoid the floods. That is, the forest will avoid floods. How? Because the huge very aged trees and many other plants which are present in the forest will hold the soil tighter, and it won't lead to the floods. It won't lead, or it won't create problems of floods, and the soil will be held by the roots of the trees and plants, and that is how they are avoiding or migrating the droughts and floods.